Mike, him from New York. We're coming to you. Wants to talk about DNA and the existence of God. So, Mike, you are on the air with Jimmy and
Hello.
Scott. Yeah, Mike, what is up?
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Hey.
How are you guys?
Doing good.
Very
doing
well.
good.
Very well. How are you? And how can we help you? More importantly,
We're fine. That was the first thing I was going to ask you. How can I help you?
I don't know. I mean, hey, look, I guess I'm always looking for help in some way, but you called today, you wanted to talk to us. What's the point you want to make?
I can't remember exactly what the statement was, but it had something to do with believing in God. And I said, DNA is all the proof that you ever need. And
Okay.
I'll give you the reason for that. I'm 63 years old. About 5 years ago, I was starting to have some physical issues, and I ended up going to the emergency room, and they told me my blood pressure was 240 over 120, and that the doctor said he'd never seen anybody still alive with those types of numbers. But turns out I have a blood cancer that's caused by a genetic mutation of what's called the JAK2 protein. So I went to Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. I met with a specialist and talked with him, put me on medication. So I decided to do some studying of DNA and the genetic mutation. Well, as many people know, all of your genetic information is basically 3 billion base pairs of information are in every single cell of your body. And we all know about the double helix, but I didn't really know how DNA actually worked and how it did its job. But and I'm a layman, I'm not going to tell you I'm some type of scientist, but looking at how the DNA works from a translation point of view, from transcription, elongation, ribosomes, these molecular machines. After reviewing that, I came away with the impression that this is actual proof that there's a designer. I'm a software developer. I've been a software developer for 40 years. The way the DNA works is like a program. I mean, when it's making a protein, it says there are codons that say start making this protein at this juncture, and keep copying and translating until you get to this juncture.
All right. Well, Mike, I'm gonna jump in right here. I think that you, and I appreciate the call, and thank you for all the info. Yeah, I want to just keep the conversation flowing. I'm not trying to cut you off or be disrespectful, but I think that you have laid out the things that have convinced you that God is a creator, that there is a creator God, and you have basically said, yeah, the studies that you've done and the things that you've come up with have led you to that point. And so you've made your claim. Scott, if you wouldn't mind, I'll let you go ahead and take a first stab at responding to Mike.
Sure thing. Mike, thanks for your thanks for your call. I appreciate you calling in and sharing this with us. I suppose the first thing that I would ask you is, it appears that you are amazed at the complexity and amazed at the seemingly step-by-step. And you talked about software development. I have a little bit of a software background in my own life. I'm curious, how do you make the jump from it appears like it was designed to the conclusion that it was designed? Excuse me. I don't know if you heard the opening to the show, but we were talking about making the inference. How do we make the inference from here we have this thing to making the claim that this thing, the existence of this thing, actually entails the existence of a God? And so to restate my question again, how do you make that jump from this sure appears to, I mean, you've talked about how you weren't an expert in the field. How do you jump from it appears to be designed to me to making the conclusion that it was designed?
A couple things, and I'll give you a real quick analogy. If you and I were to walk through the desert southwest of the United States, 100 miles from anywhere and anybody, if we came across a 4x4 post with a metal box on top with the words U.S. mail embossed on it. And I told you, look, what happens with wind and erosion and rain over hundreds of years. You would think I was a lunatic. Would you not?
But that is not, that does not.
You would clearly would know that there was somebody put that there and made it.
But that doesn't answer my question. Yeah. That doesn't answer my question. My question was, how do you make the jump from it appears to be designed to it is designed? If you want to ask me about the mailbox, I can give you an answer to that, because we know people that design mailboxes. We've seen factories that make mailboxes. And so we didn't discover mailboxes and from there come to the conclusion that we have factories that make mailboxes. It was the other way around. We knew about the designers first, and then we were able to make that conclusion about the mailbox. And so that's what I would say about the mailbox there. Can you do that same thing? If this is an argument for God, are you assuming God coming into it? Because if that's the case, it's not, it's kind of a, you're begging the question, of course. But can you make that case? Can you make that connection from your evidence to your conclusion?
Well, here's my number one reason that I believe that is a God, because it is so complex. And let's take abiogenesis. Okay, the ability to create life from non-life. Scientists have been trying to do that for decades.
No, but hold on, Mike. Let me just interject here for a second. You are now completely changing the subject, right? You're introducing a completely new topic and you're deflecting from what Scott is talking about. Okay, so you are trying to advocate for this idea that because DNA is so complex that it must have a creator. And what Scott's question was, how do you get from the fact that it's complex to the fact that, or to the belief that because it's complex, there must be a creator, right? It's an awfully big gap. To introduce other scientific problems that have not been solved, other hypotheses that don't have anything to do with what we're talking about, is a deflection. You have to stay on course. And so your claim was that DNA is so complex and that your research led you to believe that there is a God that created everything. How do you get there from merely looking at the structure of DNA?
Purely mathematics. Okay.
Oh, that's a great answer, because go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so lay down the math for us here. I am math literate, so feel free to get into as much detail as you like. What's the mathematics of DNA that leads you to the conclusion that there's a God?
Okay. The proteins are the workhorse of the human body. They do every function. A small protein is made up of 150 subunits, a polypeptide chain. Each one of those subunits is made up of 1 to 20 amino acids. There are 20. That's it. So if you were to take a polypeptide chain, if you could do this on your calculator, it's going to be 1 of 20, and the next one's going to be 1 of 20, and the next one's going to be 1 of 20. Take 20 times 20 times 20, and just do it about 8, 10 times, and you're already up over 1 trillion combinations for 10, let alone 150 subunits.
Okay, so you multiplied a bunch of 20s and you have a number. How does that relate to your argument?
Sure. It relates to my argument is that evolution simply cannot occur. You cannot have enough chance occurring in the lifetime of this universe, to do the things that you expect an organism to change to. My feeling is that the DNA elements were already designed in. And is there adaptation? I totally agree that there's adaptation.
We get that that's your conclusion, but what I'm asking you is, how do you come to that conclusion? It seems to me like you're saying there wasn't enough time for this to happen naturally. Okay, and so let's assume that that's true. Let's say that our understanding of evolution requires a certain amount of time for DNA to develop, and let's say we haven't had that much time. My question still stands, okay? How can you come to the conclusion that there was a creator here just based off of what you've said so far? So make that link. So at best, what you've said so far, at best, it would show that evolution can't happen, even if we were to assume everything that you've said about mathematics, although you didn't present much as far as mathematics are concerned. How can you still make that? You still haven't done that last most important step. How do you make that leap there?
By the absolute complexity. The complexity. I mean, you have 20 trillion cells in your body. In each cell, in a mammal, there are 10 million ribosomes making DNA, making protein.
So are you saying that complexity requires a designer, or that complexity can't arrive naturally?
I'm saying no, it cannot arrive. This type of complexity cannot arise.
Mike, what you're saying.
So now you have something that you need to justify.
What you're doing is invoking the God of the gaps fallacy. Basically, you don't understand how it happened, and therefore you conclude that something beyond your understanding, like a God or a deity, must have done that thing. But we have no pathway to arrive at that conclusion. All we have, at the bare minimum, is a bunch of really complex human DNA, right? Because that's what you're talking about. But you could take DNA from any sample set of the biological world. Let's just take one sample set. It's really complex. And your conclusion is, because it's complex, therefore a God must have created it. But that is not the way anything works. No standard of evidence in anything else that we do as people works that way. We can't just guess because we don't know the answer. And that is what you are doing.
Okay. Well, listen, I tried to break it down and make it simple for you by talking about abiogenesis. Because we
go ahead, say it. Go ahead and bring up. Go ahead and make your point about abiogenesis, because you tried to talk about abiogenesis, but what you were also doing at that same time was deflecting, answering Scott's question, and you were
which you're still doing, by the way. You're still deflecting that. You're still avoiding answering my question. Sorry, Jimmy. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
How do I make?
I want him to answer the first question before we start moving on. If you want to talk about biogenesis, at least concede that you don't have a pathway to arrive at God.
My pathway to arrive at God is the complexity. You can't have that kind of design.
But we do. It's not a design, though.
Design. And the design,
if we grant the complexity, okay, if we grant the complexity, how do you then make the next step to therefore a God? Are you saying all complex things must come from a God, must come from a designer? Yeah. What if I were to pick 100 random digits in a row?
To replicate it.
The chance of that happening is 1 over 10 to 100, right? And so it's extremely unlikely, yet it just happened. And not by any design, just by randomness. Random things happen all the time. Most of the things that you see every day, all the time, are ridiculously unlikely. People win the lottery every day. And it's not because it's a likely thing. It's still an unlikely thing, but it's the entire scenario that contributes to those things happening. Same thing here. When we're talking about things developing in nature, yeah, there's all of these very unlikely things happening. That doesn't mean that they can't happen. In fact, you could argue that they must happen, that rare things have to happen. If we have 1 million people and they all buy a lottery ticket and we pick one of them at random, we've just guaranteed that a 1 in a million thing will happen. And it won't matter who wins. They all have a 1 in a million chance of winning. That's a guarantee that a 1 in a million thing will happen. And you know what? If I do it again tomorrow, it'll happen again tomorrow. So the unlikeliness doesn't necessarily lead to design. Unlikeliness just leads to unlikeliness.
Go ahead, Mike, your thoughts.
Go back to why I called.
Okay.
Why I called is because I have cancer.
Well, hold on a sec. All right. I am
patients. 99.9% of genetic mutations are cancer. They do not favor the organism.
Listen.
You're unlike.
I want to be very clear about something, Mike. Hold on, and I'm gonna just give me a chance to talk, so I don't have to use the mute button, please. I hate that. Look, I'm really sorry that you have to go through that. Okay, I just want to make that clear that we are not insensitive, and I appreciate that you're open about that. That, however, is not grounds to land on God. You know, I mean, if you called, you didn't call because you have cancer, right? I mean that very respectfully. You called to say that the complexity of DNA is proof that God exists, okay? And we've been spending quite a few minutes now just trying to get you to explain to us how you arrived there. And it seems like your answer is, well, it's so complex, we don't understand it, therefore it must be God. But think about all the things we didn't understand before. Right? There were plagues, right? That people used to get sick and die, and they thought it was witchcraft from other groups. They thought it was witchcraft from within their own groups. They thought it was God's will, you name it, because they didn't understand biology. They didn't understand germs. They didn't understand hygiene. And so when people died, they didn't understand something, and they said, well, it must be God. Here we are, and now we're in 2024, instead of back in the Middle Ages or even 100 years ago. And we're still having these same conversations just because we don't understand how something so complex can come into being, and we can't understand everything about it. We don't ascribe that to a being that we can't define, right? And you said that we can't replicate this DNA, so therefore that it must be unique in that it's God. Well, I would challenge you that you can't replicate God. I mean, you can't demonstrate it. You can't summon it. You can't show it in any way. We cannot measure it. We have no idea where it exists or how to test it. But what we do have is DNA. And what we do have is evidence for evolution. And so you're saying that those things are impossible, but to the contrary, they are quite possible. What's impossible is demonstrating God. And so here we have this conundrum, right? You claim that God is responsible for all these things, but you can't prove it. And so now, go ahead and prove it.
If there is no God, it should be child's play for us to do what DNA does and create life from non-life. It would be child's play.
Why did you say should in there? Justify the use of that word should. You said it should be child's play for us to do it if there's no God. Why do you think that should be the case?
Because with the supercomputers we have today, with everything that we think we know, we ought to be able to replicate the primordial soup that you say, well, nobody was involved in here. This all happened because of the elements.
Right. That you're just repeating what you said before. You said we should be able to do it. And then I said, explain why we should be able to do it. And you said, well, we ought to be able to do it. Changing the words doesn't justify your use of the words. Okay. Why do you think that we should be able? You're saying that we can't do something that happened. Why do you think we should be able to do that?
We can't. We have attempted. There are many scientists that have attempted.
You said we should be able to. I want you to justify just at least one thing that you're saying today. Why do you think that we should be able to do that?
Listen, we're talking this primordial.
That's not answering my question. I'll ask you one more time. Why do you think we should be able to do that? Let me reframe what's going on here. Sorry, Mike, let me reframe this here. And I want to make sure I get what you're saying here first, okay? Are you saying that this DNA could not have come about naturally, right? You're saying we can exclude natural causes, and so therefore it must be God? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that there is a designer.
Okay, so if there is no God, could God have designed DNA?
If there is no God, could
DNA be God designed? If there's no God,
how could DNA be God designed if there's no God?
That's what I'm asking you.
I don't.
Are you saying that it couldn't? Are you saying that a God that doesn't exist cannot design any DNA? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that God does exist and did create DNA. And
if God does not exist, can God create DNA? It's a simple answer. We all know the answer, but I want to hear you if you agree. Can a God that doesn't exist design any DNA?
No.
Okay, good. I agree.
Because God does not exist.
How did God get on your list of possible explanations for DNA? How did God get on your list? Because you're saying, I have this list of possible things. We can eliminate all these natural possibilities if we're granting you that we can. Okay, so that's for the sake of argument, we'll stipulate that. If we can eliminate these natural causes off of our list of possible explanations, you're saying that leaves just God. How did God get on the list? Because, as you just agreed, if God doesn't exist, then God can't be on that list. So either you're assuming that God exists, which begs the question, or some other reason. How did God get on your list of possible explanations?
Because to me, it is clearly designed, which implies a designer.
To you. And that is a big distinction. That's a big distinction, Mike. Because
I'm telling you what meant to me.
But that's not what you said in the beginning, because what you said is that DNA is the only proof that we will ever need. And I assume that Scott and I are included in that we. The thing is, though, both of us are somewhat educated. I consider myself to be somewhat educated. I mean, I'm not a biologist or a scientist by any means, but I think I've absorbed enough information about the natural world to understand why evolution and why DNA, or at least how it formed the way that it did and how evolution took place. None of that provides for a God. In fact, we can separate the idea of God completely from what we understand about the world, and we still have the world exactly the same, unchanged, right? God really fulfills no necessary niche whatsoever. There is not a natural process that happens in the world that God and only God fills. It's just this kind of outlier, right? It's this thing, this idea that's floating around out there that people turn to and say, well, how about God as an option? And that's what Scott's asking you. You know, how did you arrive at God being your choice? Out of all the other things that could have led to the development of DNA, right? All of the natural processes over 14 billion or 4 billion years, right? That could have led to the development of DNA. You chose this, if you will, invisible, what I would say imaginary character that you cannot test, communicate with, you cannot demonstrate, this thing that's almost impossible to show. That's your conclusion.
You also seem to have eliminated any possible natural explanation that we don't know about yet, or that we can't know about, or that we don't understand. Okay, so you're excluding those, but you still have God, and you still haven't justified putting God on your list. You know, this happens a lot with these style of arguments, these what else could it be type of arguments. And there's really two parts to a what else could it be argument. It involves coming up with some possible explanations for the for the phenomenon, and then eliminating the possibilities that it can't be. Okay, and so there's you've done some of the second, or at least you say you've done some of the second. If we grant that you've done some of the second, maybe some of the processes that we currently are aware of can't explain the existence of the DNA. Even if we go in whole hog here and we say, what if we could prove that evolution could not have generated DNA? Okay, you still haven't told me, how could God be on the list? How do you know God could be an explanation? Because as you agreed, God can only be an explanation if God exists. So either you're assuming God exists, or you have some other criteria for getting God onto that list. And so that's what I would love it if you would just answer at least one question for us today. How did God get on your list of things that could have made DNA?
I keep answering it, and you keep thinking I'm not answering it.
What's your answer? Say it one more time.
Say it. Yeah, give it to us.
I mean, if I can't explain, and if somebody else can't demonstrate to me that they can reproduce any natural occurrence that you talked about all these natural things, then we should be able to replicate a natural thing.
So what you're talking about, crossing things off the list. Okay, what I'm asking is, how did God get on the list? Crossing things off the list does nothing to add explanations to the possibilities. Okay, crossing natural, if we crossed off all possible natural explanations somehow, we would end up with an I don't know, an empty list. The only way we could come to the conclusion of a God is if we know that God could design DNA, which God can't do if God doesn't exist. And so again, are you assuming God exists, or is there some other criteria? I can't think of how it's going to work is not going to fly here. Okay, you have to cross natural explanations off. You still have to get that God onto the list. How does that happen?
You asked me your producer asked me when I called in, am I a theist or an atheist? I said I'm a theist. I grew up going to church, but I always thought, well, you know what? Maybe I'm believing in the Bible is not the truth, because we do have DNA, we do have science, and we do have all these things that maybe have proven that the Bible was incorrect. But it says in the Bible, God created the heavens and the earth, created man. Okay, I'm telling you.
So you are coming into this with some God belief, then. So perhaps, and please correct. I don't want to mischaracterize you, so please correct me if I'm mistaken here. It sounds to me like you're saying that you are coming into this assuming that a God exists. And so, if that's the case, if you're trying to provide evidence that God exists, and the only way you can get to that evidence is by first assuming that a God does exist, do you think that's a good, solid, reasonable way to come to a conclusion?
Look, my conclusion is that based on the DNA that I observed and how it works, my initial belief in God was solidified. Let's put it that way.
All right.
So why isn't anybody?
So Mike,
because
you as a child
I had doubt.
Hold on, listen. You as a child, right? Since the earliest days that you can remember, were brought up being told by people you loved and trusted and protected you that God was real and God was responsible for everything. You have absorbed a lifetime of programming that confirms your suspicions. And that was further confirmed by the fact that you went through a traumatic event and needed to make sense of it. And I think what you keep coming up with is this confirmation bias that reaffirms what you have been told by all the people that you love and trust and have related to throughout your life. I mean, this is a very social and cultural construct to believe in this kind of thing. But really, in the end, what you're telling us is that your whole life you've been told that God is the author of everything we know, the creator of all of the most complex things. And here you have a complex thing. It must be God. And what Scott and I are simply saying is that evidence is not good enough for us, because that's not evidence. That's just a guess. It's a warm, fuzzy feeling that really doesn't do anything for the argument that God exists. And so that is how I'm going to actually end this call. I think that this was a really good conversation. We've got other callers on the line. Mike, thanks a lot for calling us. I thought that was a great exchange. And thank you, Scott, for being so involved in that call. That was great.